I think that's what I find. And I wonder the people hearing this, if they thought like, well, surely Lord, that not be the case. Like you are bringing in this new kingdom. Isn't this kingdom going to be one of absolute purity? What I think he's striking at, which I do find a little bit wild, is that Jesus is essentially saying, at least to my ear, anything we try to do, even the purest preaching of the gospel is not going to prevent this. In every age of the church,
Hey, brother, do you still believe in one another?
welcome to episode 465 of the Reformed Brotherhood. I am Jesse.
And I'm Tony, and this is the podcast with ears to hear. Hey, brother.
Hey, brother. Guess what? It looks like you and I are taking another trip back to the farm on this episode.
Yes, for a couple episodes.
For a couple episodes, yeah. Because what? Jesus will not stop leading us there. We're looking at his teachings, specifically the parables. And we're going to be looking in Matthew chapter 13, where it seems like, is it possible that Jesus, once again, has something very shocking for us to hear that is for all the ages? Because it seems like he might actually be saying, Tony, that good and evil will always be found together in the professing church until the end of the world. Like, in other words, that the visible church is set before us a mixed body. I mean, maybe everybody else's churches, but certainly not my church, like the one that I actually go to on the Lord's Day. So it seems like there might be this shocking statement possibly that he has for us, whether you're Episcopalian or Presbyterian or Independent or Baptist or Christian Life Assembly, whatever it is, that no matter what we do to purify the church, our churches, we're never going to succeed in obtaining a perfectly pure communion. Could that possibly be what Jesus is saying to us? I don't know, but we're going to find out.
We are going to find out.
And it's going to be definitive. And if now that makes sense, if you don't even know why we're looking at Jesus' teachings, you can do us a favor even before you go any further. And that is just head on over in your favorite interwebs browser to reformbrotherhood.com, and you can find out all of the other episodes, all 464 that are living out there. There's all kinds of good stuff. At least we think so, or at least entertaining stuff for you to listen to. And when you're done with all of that in a year or two, then we'll pick it up right back here where we're about to go with some affirmations or some denials. So Tony, before we figure out what Jesus has for us in Matthew 13 and the parable of the weeds or the tares and the wheat, we'll get to all that. Are you affirming with or are you denying against?
I am denying, first of all, I'm denying whatever this thing is that's going on with my throat. Sorry for the rest of the episode, everyone. I'm denying something that I think it is, how do I want to phrase this? Maybe I'll call it theological integrity. And maybe that's too strong of a word, but maybe not. So the listener who's been with us for a little while will remember that a while back, we've talked about Matthew Barrett, and he was a Baptist who was heavily involved in sort of the theology proper controversies. He wrote Simply Trinity, which is just a fantastic book. He was a teacher or a professor at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. And he recently converted is not the right word. I hate calling it a conversion when you go from one faithful Bible tradition to another, but he recently changed his perspective and joined the Anglican Church. And at the time I kind of talked about it as like, it's a little bit disappointing, the reasons he cited. Where I'm bringing this into a matter of sort of theological integrity, and it's not just Matthew Barrett. There's other elements of things going on that I'll point to too, is it's often the case when someone who is in some form of professional theological work or professional vocational ministry, that as they start to change perspectives, there comes to be like an inflection point where they should notify whoever it is that they are accountable to in that job or vocation, and then do the right thing and step down. Right. And so with Matthew Barrett, he continued to teach systematic theology at a Baptist theological seminary, which has a faith statement, which he was obligated to affirm and hold in good faith. He continued to teach there for quite some time. When he published the timeline, and he's the one that put all the timelines out there, so it's not like people had to go digging for this. He continued to teach under contract and under that faith statement for quite some time after his positions changed. I remember in college, very similar situation. One of my professors, and I went to a Baptist college. It was a general Baptist college. One of my professors became Roman Catholic. And for quite some time, he continued to teach without telling anyone that he had converted to Roman Catholicism. Um, and I think that there's a level of integrity that public theologians need to have. And it really makes it difficult when something like this happens to be able to say that this is not a moral failing or some sort of failure. James White has jumped on the bandwagon very quickly to say, of course, we told you that this was the way it was going to lead, that if you affirm the great tradition, he was very quick to say, like, this is the road to Rome. And I think in his mind, Canterbury is just sort of one stop on that trip. It becomes very hard after the fact to not have this color and tarnish all of your work before, because it starts to be questions like, well, when did you start to hold these views? Were you publicizing Baptist theology when you no longer believed it to be the truth? Were you teaching theology students that this is what the Bible teaches when you no longer thought that to be true? Were you secretly attending Anglican services and even teaching and helping deliver the service when you were, still outwardly affirming a Baptist faith statement? And the reason I'll point out one other thing, because I don't want this to be entirely about Matthew Barrett, but there's a big hullabaloo going on in the PCA right now. A guy named Michael Foster, who some of our audience will probably be familiar with. He and I have had our dust-ups in the past, but I think he and I have come to a little bit of a uneasy truce on certain things. He went to work compiling a list, and there's some problems with the data, like it's not clean data, so take it for what it's worth. But he compiled a list of every publicly available church website in the PCA. So something like 1,800 websites or something like that, huge numbers. And he went and looked at all of the staff and leadership directories, and he cataloged all the churches that had some sort of office or some sort of position that appeared to have a woman leading in a way that the Bible restricts. And that more importantly, and it's strange to say it this way, but more importantly, that the PCA itself restricts. So we're not talking about him going to random church websites and making assessments of their polity. We're talking about a denomination that has stated standards for who can bear office, and it's not women. So he compiled this, and people in the PCA are coming out of the woodwork to basically defend the practice of having shepherdesses and deacons. There was one that he cataloged where the website actually said there was the pastor's wife, and the title was Pastor of Women. And then as soon as it became public that this was the case, they very quickly went in and changed the title to Shepherd of Women or Shepherdess of Women or something like that. So it's really the same phenomena, not commenting, I think we've been clear where we stand on the ordination of female officers and things like that, but not that all that withstanding, when you are going to be a part of a body that has a stated perspective on something and then just decide not to follow it, the right thing to do, the upstanding, morally full of integrity move would be to simply go to another denomination where your views align more closely. PCA churches, it's not super easy, but it's not impossible to leave the PCA as an entire congregation and then go somewhere like the EPC, which is the Evangelical Presbyterian Church, which still on the spectrum of things is still relatively conservative, but is in general is in favor of female officers, elders, and deacons. So I think, and you see this with podcasters, there was a big fuss when Les became a Presbyterian. And then when Tanner became a Presbyterian on the podcast, I think it is incumbent on people who do any form of public theology, and that would include me and Jesse. When our views change, there comes a point where we need to disclose that, be honest about it, and not try to pretend that we continue to hold a view that we don't, just because it's convenient or because it might be super inconvenient to make a change. I don't even want to pretend to imagine the pressures that someone like Matthew Barrett would face. I mean, you're talking about losing your entire livelihood. I understand that from an intellectual perspective, how difficult that must be. But in some ways, like that kind of comes with the territory. Same thing with a pastor. You have a Baptist pastor or a Presbyterian pastor. It can go both ways. I think I'm more familiar with Baptists becoming Presbyterians. I don't see as many going the other direction. But you have a Baptist pastor who comes to Paedo Baptist convictions and then continues to minister in their church for. I've seen cases where they continue to minister for years because they don't have the ability to now just go get a job in a Presbyterian context because there's all sorts of training and certification and ordination process that needs to happen. So they just continue ministering where they are, even though they no longer believe the church's stated faith statement. So that's a lot to say, like, let your yes be yes and your no's be no, when we really all boil it down. So I think that's enough of that. It just sort of got in my craw this week, and I couldn't really stop thinking about it because it's been very frustrating. And now there are stories coming out of doctoral students that that Barrett was teaching who have now also become Anglican. So, there starts to be questions of like, was he actively I mean, this is like Jacob Arminius did this stuff. And like the Reformed tradition would look down on it, where he was in secret in like sort of small group private settings. He was teaching convictions very different than I'm talking about Arminius now, not necessarily Barrett. He's teaching convictions very different than the stated theology of the university he taught for. And then in public, he was sort of towing the line. You have to ask the question, and it is just a question. There's been no confirmation that I'm aware of, but you have to ask the question if that was what was going on with Barrett. Was he teaching Baptist theology publicly and then meeting with PhD students privately and sort of convincing them of Anglican theology? I don't know. I'm not speculating on that, but I think the situation definitely brings that question to mind. It forces us to ask it. And had he been transparent about his theological shifts sooner, then that may not be a question we have to ask. The situation may not be all that different, but we wouldn't have to ask the question.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I mean, disclosure is important in lots of places in life, and we shouldn't think that theological disclosure, especially like you're saying among our teachers, among our pastors, it is a critical thing. It's helpful for people to know when perspectives have changed, especially when they're looking to their leaders who are exhibiting trust and care over their discipleship or their education to express that difference. If there's been a marked change, it's worth it to disclose. I'm guessing you don't have to over disclose, but that we're talking about a critical, we're talking about like subversive Anglicanism, allegedly, then it would be more than helpful to know that is now shaping not just perspective, but of course, like major doctrine, major understanding.
Yeah.
And then of course, by necessary conviction and extension, everything that's being promulgated or proclamated in the public sphere from that person has likely now been permeated by that. And we'd expect so, right? If convictions change, and especially like you're talking about, we're just talking about moving from, especially among like Bible believing traditions, just raise the hand and say, loved ones, this is my firm conviction now.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if someone walks up to you and says, do you think that we should baptize babies? And you're like, yeah, I think so. Then you probably shouldn't be teaching at a Baptist seminary anymore. Like, seems like a reasonable standard. And that seems to be what happened, at least for some period of time. That's not to say, like, I think there are instances where the church, a given church or a university or seminary or whatever the situation might be, can be gracious and recognize, like, yeah, people's perspectives change, and maybe we can find a way for you to continue to finish out the semester, or, we can bridge you for a little while until you can find a new job. We'll only have you teach certain courses, or we'll have a guest lecturer come in when you have to cover this subject that is at variance, and like, we'll make sure we're all clear about it. But it doesn't seem like any of that happened. And that's no bueno. So anyway, Jesse, what are you affirming and or denying tonight?
I'm just going to go with something brief. I suppose this is an affirmation of me. I'm saying that like somewhat tongue in cheek, but maybe I'll rephrase. It's because this will be more humble. I'm affirming getting it right even more than I thought. So I'm just going to come back to the well and dip into something that I mentioned on the last episode. So the keen listener, the up-to-date listener might remember. And if you're not up to date, just let this be fresh for you. It's going to be correct because now I have post, I'm on the other side of it. I have clear hindsight. I am affirming with the album Keep It Quiet by Greyhaven, which I affirmed last week, but it came out on the same day that the episode released. And since you and I don't record in real time and release it like exactly as it's happening, I only did that with a little bit of reservation because I only heard they only released 3 songs in the album. And I thought I was overwhelmed that they were so good that I was ready to jump in. And loved ones, it turns out I was so correct. And it was even better than I thought. So go check it out. It's great. Grey Haven. And this is the warning, just because I have to give it out there. And then I'll balance it with something else, something for everybody here today. So Greyhaven is music that's post-hardcore and metalcore. You're getting 2 cores for the price of 1, if that is your jam. It has strong melodic sensibilities. It's very emotional. It's very experimental, but this new album, which is called again, Keep It Quiet, is like just a work of art. Like the guitar work is intricate, haunting, lovely, and it's both like very intentional in its structure and very loose in its construction. It's got hook driven melodies and it's got both hard and soft. It really is truly a work of art. So if you're trying to put in your minds like what other bands are like this, I would compare them to bands like Every Time I Die, Norma Jean, Let Live, Hail the Sun. If you just heard those as combinations of words that don't mean anything to you, that's also okay. No worries. But if you're looking for something different, if you're looking for something that's maybe going to challenge your ear a little bit, but is like orchestral and has all of these metalcore, post-hardcore, melodic, textured movements, there's no wasted notes in this album. It's really tremendous. If that's not your thing, and I get that's not everybody's thing, here's something else I think would be equally challenging to the ear in a different way. And that is, I'm going back to one other album to balance things out here. And that's an album that was released in 2019 by Mark Barlow, who I think is like just so underrated for some reason. Like people have slept on Mark Barlow. I have no idea why. He put together an album with Isla Vista Worship called Soul Hymns. And it's like a distinct soul and R&B album of praise with like these really lovely like falsetto harmonies. It's got these minimalistic instrumentation, warm keys, groove oriented percussion, like again, like these falsetto driven melodies. It's contemplative. It's got a groove to it. This is also equally a beautiful album for a totally different reason. So I think I've given two very bookended, very different affirmations, but I think there's something for everybody. So my challenge to you loved ones is you got to pick one or the other. Actually, you could do both, but either go to Gray Haven's Keep It Quiet or go to Mark Barlow's Soul Hymns. I do not think you will be disappointed. There's something for everybody on this one.
Yeah, it was funny because as you were saying the names of those bands, I literally was thinking like Jesse could be speaking Swahili and I wouldn't know the difference. And then you know me well. Yeah, I haven't listened to Grey Haven. I probably will give it a couple minutes because that's how it usually goes with songs that meet that description. I can always tell that the music that Jesse recommends is good from a technical perspective, but I never really vibe with it. So
it's okay.
But I mean, lots of people who listen to our show do. So check that out. If you ever want a good recommendation for music, Jesse is the person, so much so that he can recommend amazing music before it's even available and be 100% correct, apparently.
That's right. So affirm with me, everybody, because turns out I was right. It was easy to be correct when, of course, I had all of that farsightedness by being able to listen to those couple of songs. This is a kind of album, both of these albums. When I heard them, I reacted audibly out loud. There are parts of both of them where I actually said, "Oh, wow," or "Yeah." Like there's just good stuff in there. And the older you get, if you're a music fan, even if you're not, if you don't listen to a lot of music, you know when that hook gets you. You know when that turn of melody or phrase really like hits you just right. Everybody has that where the beat drops in a way. You're just like, yes, give me, you make a face, like you get into it. I definitely had that experience with both of these albums. And because I've listened to a lot of music, because I love listening to music, it's increasingly rare where I get surprised, where, you know, sometimes stuff is just like popular music is popular for a reason. And it's good because it's popular and it follows generally some kind of like well-established roots. But with these albums, it's always so nice when somebody does something that is totally unexpected. And in these, I heard things that I did not expect at all. And it's so good to be surprised in a way that's like, why have I never heard that before? That is amazing. And both of these bands did it for me. So I know I'm like really hyping them up, but they're worth it. They're totally worth it. Good music is always worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is a good recommendation. I will check those out because, you know,
you're good, brother.
Do. And I trust your judgment, even though
you will like the second one.
Less, hopefully. Yeah. Yeah.
You'll like the second one. Second one is like just filled with praise and worship. And like, if you're trying to think like, say, here's how I'd couch the proper atmosphere for Mark Barlow's soul hymns. You're having, you know, it's a cold and chilly autumnal evening. The wind is blowing outside. You can hear the crisp leaves moving around on the pavement. and the sun has gone down. The kids are in bed. The dinner dishes are piled up in the sink, but you think to yourselves, not tonight. I don't think so. And you just want that tunage to put on. You want that music. As you dim the lights and you sit there to just hang out with each other and take a breath, you don't just want some kind of nice R&B moving music. You don't want just relaxing vibes. You want worshipful, spirit-filled vibes that propel your conversation and your intimacy, not just into the marital realm, but into worship and harmony with the triune God. If you're looking for that album because that situation is before you, then Soul Hymns is the music you're looking for.
See, I'm gonna get the recommendations backwards, and I'm gonna sit down with my wife with a nice like evening cup of decaf tea, and I'm gonna turn the music on. And it's gonna be like, that was me screaming into the microphone. That was not good for my voice.
Well, the good news is
it's gonna wake the kids up. I'm gonna sleep on the couch. It's gonna be bad.
Honestly, that's also a good evening. It's just a different kind of evening.
It's true.
So it's just keep it separated. Again, by way of your denial/affirmation, Tony, disclosure. I'm just giving you proper disclosure, everybody. Know your music. KYM. So that way, when you have the setting that you want, you can match it with the music that you need. So
it's true.
Speaking of things that are always worth it, I think the Bible's got to be one of those things.
It's true.
And this is like the loosest of all segues because it's like the Sunday school segue into any topic that involves the scriptures. We're going to be in Matthew 13. And how about we do this? So this is one of these parables. And in my lovely ESV translation of the scriptures, we're just going to go with the heading, which says the parable of the weeds. You may have something different. And I want to speak to that just briefly, but how we do this, Tony, I'll hit us up with the parable. And then it just so happens that this is one of the parables in scripture that comes with an interpretation from our Savior.
It's true.
How about you hit us up with the interpretation, which is in the same chapter. If you're tracking with us, it's just a couple verses away. Does that sound good?
Let's do it.
Okay. Here is the parable of the weeds. Jesus put another parable before them, saying, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds also appeared. And the servants of the master of the house came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have weeds? He said to them, an enemy has done this. So the servant said to him, then do you want us to go and gather them? Then he said, no, lest in gathering the weeds, you root up the wheat along with them. But let them grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time, I will tell the reapers, gather the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn.
All right. So then jumping down to verse 36, we're still in Matthew 13. He says, then he left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples came to him saying, explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field. He answered, the one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed is the sons of the kingdom. The weeds are the sons of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angel. Just as the weeds are gathered and burned with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all lawbreakers, and throw them into the fiery furnace. It is that in that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear.
So let me start with just like a little bit of language here, which I've always loved in this passage, because where else in like the contemporary context do you get the word tear, aside if you're like using a scale, and that's a totally different definition. I like this. I like the word tear. It forces us to understand what's common to our ear, why that's being used. It often is translated weed. Here's just my little like linguistic addition to the front end of our discussion. And is the reason I like it is because tear does have a specific definition. If like you were to look this up in almost any dictionary, what you're going to find is it's like a particular type of weed. It's actually like an injurious weed that is indistinguishable in its infant form from the outgrowing of grain. So I like that because, of course, that is exactly why then there's all this explanation of why then to not touch anything in the beginning. Because one, it causes damage. Two, it looks like everybody else. I just thought I'd put that out there as we begin our discussion.
Yeah. Yeah. I am a homeowner and I don't own the land that I'm on, but I'm responsible for the land that I'm on. And we have this really gnarly weed problem. There's this sort of floor growing carpeting weed called, I think it's called like a carpeting knobhead weed or something like that, some really descriptive thing. And I went out there the other day, and there's really nothing you can do about this other than to rip it up. But I went out there the other day to start to pull some of it up, and it totally wrecks the yard. Like it totally pulls up the grass, it destroys the sod. And when you're done, this is why it's kind of nice that I'm not responsible for the land, is I'm not going to have to pay to resod the land. But when you're done pulling up this weed, you have to resod the whole place. You have to regrow all the grass because it takes over for the grass. And then when you rip it up, it rips the roots of the grass up as well. And so this parable, on one level, is immediately obvious, like what the problem is.
Right.
The situation is such that the good sower, right? He's a good sower. He knows what he's doing. He understands that simply ripping up the weeds, even if you could distinguish them, right? There's this element that, like, at an early stage, they would be very difficult, if not impossible, to distinguish from weeds. Even if you could distinguish them, you still wouldn't be able to pull up the weeds and not do damage to the grain. And so we have this sort of like conflict, if you want to follow like literary standards, right? We have this conflict. And as we come to sort of the climax of this plot is when all of a sudden we see that the problem needs a resolution, and there is a resolution, but it's not necessarily what we would think it would be.
Yeah, I think that's what I find shocking. It is like a massive statement of reality that is at like equal points or equal times totally sensible. And at other times we would think, well, why? Surely not in the church, Lord. Like, of all the places, like, aren't we talking about a kind of purity of your people, the very people that you're assembling together, the chief of which is Christ, and the apostles being the building stones, and Christ, of course, being the cornerstone. And I think that's what I find. And I wonder the people hearing this, if they thought like, well, surely, Lord, that not be the case. Like, you are bringing in and ushering in this new kingdom. Isn't this new kingdom going to be one of absolute purity? And what I think he's striking at, which I do find a little bit wild, is that Jesus is essentially saying, at least to my ear, anything we try to do, even like the purest preaching of the gospel, is not going to prevent this. In every age of the church, the same state of the things has existed. And that is in the time of the early fathers, in the first century, and the church as it stands right now, in the land in the time of the reformers, and of course, with the best ministers at this hour right now and on your next Lord's Day, and everyone after that. There is always and ever will be a visible church or a religious assembly in which the members are not all wheat.
Yeah.
And then I like what you're saying. It's this idea that there's a great harm that's going to come about if you try to lift them up, because you cannot tell. So, and this is what's hard. I think this does influence like how we interact with people online, certainly how we interact with people in our own congregations. But we are going to have no clear convicted proofs. We might only have like probable symptoms if we're really trying to judge and weigh out to discern the wheat from the weeds, which at most can only give us some kind of conjectural knowledge of another state. And that is going to sometimes preemptorily cause us to judge others in a way that basically there's a warning against here. It's not the right time. And I think mainly from the outside, where I find like this parable coming together, if there's like maybe a weird Venn diagram of the way Christians read this and the way unbelievers hear this, the overlap between them is, for me, often this idea of like hypocrisy. And, when people tell me that the church is full of hypocrites, either like Christian or non-Christian, but typically that's a statement that comes from the non-Christian tongue. When people say that the church is full of hypocrites, I do, with a little bit of snark, say it's definitely not full of hypocrites. There are always room for more in the church. and there's like a distinction, of course, between the fact that there is hypocrisy in the Christian, or whether the Christian is in fact, or that person is a hypocrite. So like when I look through the scriptures, we see like Pharaoh confessing, we see Herod practicing, we see Judas preaching Christ, Alexander venturing his life for Paul. We see David condemning in another what he himself practiced, and like Hezekiah glorifying in riches, Peter doing all kinds of Peter stuff that he does, and even all the disciples forsaking Christ in hour of trouble and danger. So all that to say, it goes back to this like lack of clear convictive proofs that I think Jesus is bringing forward here, but only probable symptoms. And I'm still processing, of course, like the practicality of what you're saying, Tony, that in some ways it seems like abundantly clear and sensible that you're going to have a problem distinguishing, but our human nature wants to go toward distinguishing and then toward uprooting sometimes. And the warning here is do not uproot at the improper time. And in fact, it's not even yours to uproot, because God will send in the laborers to do that at the time of harvest. And so there will be weeds found among the wheat. It's just like full stop statement. And at the same time, it's a warning, do not go after them now.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure this, I'm sure this will spill over into a second conversation, but I think we have to talk a little bit about the interpretation here before we even like talk more about the parable itself, because if you're not careful, and I need to do a little bit more study on this, but it's interesting because Matthew almost seems to want you to sort of blend these parables together a little bit.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
There's three, maybe four, if you count the parable of the treasure in the field, but there's three agricultural parables that have to do with sowing seed of one way or another. And in each one, the seed is something different. And it almost seems to me, and then on top of that, the parables are like interwoven within each other. So like right smack in the middle of this, we have the parable is given. Then the next parable of the mustard seed, which we're going to talk about in a future episode, is given. And then the explanation of this parable of the tares is given. And so we have to talk a little bit about it and sort of establish what the seed is, because we just spent 3 weeks talking about the seed in the parable of the sower, or the parable of the soils. And in that parable, the seed was the word of God. In this parable, and this is where I think sometimes, and again, this is like the doctrine of election in parable form, right?
Yes.
I think sometimes we read this and we misstep, because the seed is not the word of God in this. The seed is the believers.
Yes.
Right. So the good seed is sown into the field, which, I think maybe there'll be we can save this for next week with a little sneak peek, is it's not always clear exactly what the field is. And I think we often talk about the field as though it's the church. That doesn't necessarily align 100% with how Christ explains the parable. So we'll have to talk through that a little bit. I affirm that it is the church in a broad sense, but the way that Christ explains it, it's slightly different. But the seed is sown into the world. The sons of the kingdom of heaven are sowed into the world. And then the seed of the enemy, the bad seed, is the sons of the devil. That's also sown into the world. And so these two seeds grow up next to each other. If we think about the seed here as though it's the word of God, rather than the actual believers and unbelievers, the elect and the reprobate, we're going to make some missteps on how we understand this, because we're not talking about the seed being, doctrine being sown into the world, and some of it grows up good and some of it grows up bad, or good doctrine and bad doctrine. We're talking about the believers themselves. Sorry, Jesse is mocking my rapid attempt to mute before I cough, which I did.
That was pretty good. Yeah, that was pretty good. Listen, this is real podcasting. This is how it goes. Yeah, I'm with you. Thank you for pulling out that distinction, because it is critical. We have some overlap, of course, with Jesus being really described as the farmer, the Son of Man.
Right.
He's sowing this good seed, but not the word. It's believers, or the sons of the kingdom. And it is into his field, which is the world. Part of that world, of course, is necessarily the church.
Right.
But while everybody's sleeping, this enemy, the devil, he comes, he sows weeds, or unbelievers, the sons of the evil one, among this wheat. They both go up together. And of course, like if I were a servant in this household, I'd ask the same thing, which was like, should we get the gloves out and just pull those bad boys out? Like, and so again, that's why I find it somewhat shocking that it's not, you could see like Jesus saying something like, don't worry about it now, because listen, at the end of all time, when the harvest comes, I'm going to take care of it. Like, it's just not worth it to go out now. That's not entirely the reason he gives. The reason is lest they uproot the wheat by mistake. So this is showing that the servants who are coming before Jesus in the parable in this teaching here, to really volitionally and with great fidelity and good obedience to him, to want to please him, to do his will, he's basically saying you are not qualified to undertake this kind of horticulture because you're just not either skilled enough or discerning enough to be able to do it right.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think maybe just a word of methodology too. This parable also flies in the face of all of the like parables are not allegories kind of people. And we talked about this in our introductory episode. You have to take each parable for what it's worth. This parable very much is explained like a traditional allegory, right? It's got several different elements, and Christ goes through, and the first thing he does is tell you what each element represents, right? The sower is the Son of Man. The field is the Word. The good seed is the sons of the kingdom. The wheat. It's like he's like clicking down all of the symbols, and then he explains how all of it works together. And like a good allegory, once you understand what each element and each symbol is, the rest of it actually is very self-explanatory, right? When you understand who is what in the parable, the outcome and the sort of the punchline writes itself, as it were. And I think this is one of those parables that we would do well to sort of let marinate a little bit, because it does challenge a lot of our sensibilities of what is real in the world, what is real in terms of our interaction with the world, what's real in terms of the role of unbelievers in the life of a Christian, whether we can identify who is or isn't an unbeliever. I think I'm not one of those people that's like, we should assume everyone's a Christian. And I'm certainly not one of those people who's like, we should assume nobody is a Christian. But I think there are a lot of times where we have figures either in public or people in our lives, like personal acquaintances, that have some sort of outward appearance. And that's like the key here, that distinction between weeds is not a great translation, as you said, because that distinction between wheat and weeds, to go to my analogy, like it's very clear what is grass and what is this like carpeting knobweed. Like there's no doubt in my mind which is the weed and which is the grass. That's not what we're talking about here. And so it does say here, I mean, it implies here that it's not going to be easy to distinguish the difference between a son of the kingdom and a son of the evil one. And I think that's a theological pill that is very difficult to swallow. Because a lot of us, and this goes back to like what we were saying in the last parable, a lot of us were reared in our Christian faith on sort of this idea that like you can check your fruit or you can check other people's fruit, and you can easily identify who's a Christian and who's not. I remember when I was in high school, I was converted when I was 15, and I got to high school, and it felt very easy to me to be able to identify the people who were play acting Christianity and the people who were real Christians. That felt like the most natural thing in the world to me. It's an interesting story, but one of the people that I was absolutely sure was not a Christian, that he was just doing kind of civic Christianity. He was in confirmation because his parents wanted him to. And I had good reason to believe that at the time. He was very worldly. He did not seem to be serious about his faith at all. There was good reason to make the assessment that I did. And then I ran into him on Facebook like 15 years later. He's a pastor at a Lutheran church, and he loves the Lord Jesus Christ. And he would not explain it as though he had a later conversion story. It's not as though he would say like, well, yeah, in high school, I pretended to be a Christian. And then, I got through college and I really became like, I got converted. He would grow this, or he would explain this as slow, steady growth from an immature state that knew the facts of the gospel and in a certain sense trusted that Jesus was his savior and didn't fully understand the ramifications of that. I mean, who did at 15 years old? And that it was a slow, steady growth to the place that he's in now. So I think we should take seriously, and maybe this is the takeaway for this week at least, and we can talk about it more, is we should take seriously the fact that the sons of the kingdom and the sons of the evil one in this parable are not only inseparable without doing damage, but in many ways they are not easily distinguishable.
Right on.
And that's baked into the parable. And I think we do spend a fair amount of time, and I'll throw myself on this, this we. I'm not just saying we. We is a genuine statement. Like, I have participated in this. I'm sure that I still do participate in this, sometimes intentionally, other times subconsciously. we spend a fair amount of time probably in our Christian lives trying to figure out who is a Christian and who's not. And
Yes.
it's not as though that is entirely illegitimate, right? The as much as we kind of poke at the workers in this who sort of are kind of chumps, right? They're sort of like the idiots in this. They don't seem to know how this happened. They propose a course of action that then the master's like, no, that's not going to work. They can tell the difference, right? They can see that some are weeds and some are wheat, and they're asking, well, what do we do about it? But at the same time, he is saying, like, you're not really competent to tell the difference.
Right on.
A good, competent farmer could probably go out and take all the weeds out, just like a really good, I don't know, landscape technician. I'm not sure what you would call it. I'm sure someone could come into my yard, and if I paid them enough money, they could probably fix this knobby grassweed, whatever it is, infestation. They could probably fix it without damaging the lawn. Like, there are probably people that could do it. I am not that competent person. And the workers in this are not that competent person. And I would say by and large in our Christian life, we're not that competent person to be able to identify who is and who isn't a Christian, who is or isn't a son of the kingdom versus a son of the devil.
And there's sometimes like we just get history reprised, or it's like, again, the same thing microwaved over and served to you 3 or 4 times as leftovers. So it's also going to reminder, like as extension of that, like any attempt to like purify the church perfectly, and this has happened like Donatism in the 4th century, I think, or even like now certain sectarian movements are completely misguided. And Jesus already puts that out ahead of us here. It's almost like, do not worry what God is doing, because God again is doing all the verbs. So here's a question I think we should discuss as we move toward like the top of the hour. And I think this is interesting. I don't know if you'll think it's interesting. I kind of have an answer, but I'll pose it here first. So the setup, like you've just given us, is 2 things. One, we got the visible church. We talk about the visible church, I think, a lot across our conversations.
Yeah.
And we might summarize it saying it's like the community of all who profess faith, maybe even the community of all who are baptized, right? Possibly.
Yeah.
And it's going to include then necessarily, as Jesus describes it here, true and false believers. So that's one group. Then we've got this invisible church, which, as you said, is the elect, those who are known perfectly to God. So the good seed is those elect true believers. The weeds to me, or the tares even better, they sound a lot like that second and third soils that we talked about previously to some degree. I'm not going to lump them all in, because we talked about receiving the word and it taking root, all that stuff, but to some degree. And also probably like a soil one. But here's the way I would define them. Up and against, or in contradistinction to the elect true believers, they are the reprobate, they are false professors, or they're children of the evil one. Now, here's the question, Tony. I think this is very interesting. I'm trying to build this up for like more dramatic effect, because now I'm worried it's not that good. The question is, I'm going to presume that this good seed, the elect, true to believers, the confidence of perseverance of the saints, the justification and sanctification of God's children, is in fact, though we at some points have our own doubts, it is made fully aware and known to the good seed. That is, we should have, as you and I have talked about before, the confidence that God has in fact saved his elect. So the question then on the other side is for the tares. Do the tares always know that they are the tares?
Yeah. I mean, I think I've said this before, and I mean it, and I think it takes probably more discussion than we have time for tonight, and that's fine, because we can do as many episodes on this as we want to, because this is our show and you can't stop us.
Actually correct.
I've said before that assurance is the proper and rightful possession and inheritance of every Christian.
Amen.
Right? So I'm not one to say that the technical terminology is that assurance is not of the essence of faith. I think we have to be really careful when we say that it's not, but we have to be equally careful when we say that it is. Because if we say that assurance is of the essence of faith, then what that means is someone who doesn't have assurance doesn't have faith. The reason I say that we can say that is because there's a sense that that's true, right? If you don't believe you're saved, then you don't believe you're saved, and you don't trust that you're saved. But that doesn't mean that you always have full awareness of that confidence. And, I think you're right that it may not always be. Let me put it this way. I think that we have to consider the entire life of a Christian when we're making that analysis. And in a certain sense, like, I'm not even sure we should be making that analysis. That's kind of the point of the parable here, or at least one of the points. But when that analysis is made, we'll channel a little bit of R.C. Sproul. It's not as funny when he's actually gone. I don't really mean channel R.C. Sproul. We will speak in the tradition of R.C. Sproul. In the final analysis, whatever that means, whenever that is, you have to consider the whole life of a Christian, the whole life of a believer. And so there may be times in the life of a believer where they don't possess that full assurance of faith, or that
Right.
full assurance is weak, or that it seems to be absent. But when we look at the entire life of a believer, is it a life that overall is marked by a confident trust that they are in fact children of God? A confident embracing of what the Spirit testifies to their spirit, to borrow language from Romans. I think in the life of a true elect Christian, that with the perseverance of the saints, with the persistence of the saints and the preservation of the saints, I think that, yes, those who are finally saved, those who are saved unto salvation, if you want to phrase it that way, they finish the race, they claim the prize. That assurance will be their possession in their life as a Christian.
Right on.
All of that to say, I think there's a good case to be made for the fact that there is also people who have false assurance.
Right.
And this is where it takes a lot more, finagling and jockeying and theological explanation of how can we know we have true assurance versus false assurance. It's kind of like that question, like, does an insane person know they're insane? Well, does someone with false assurance know that their assurance is false? I don't think so. Otherwise it wouldn't be false assurance. If they knew it wasn't real assurance, then they wouldn't have any kind of assurance. So I think I agree with you, at least where I think you're going, is that we do have to make some judgments. We have to look at our own life.
Right.
There is an element of fruitfulness in this parable, right? We'll talk about that. I think we'll get into that next week, but it's not as though this is entirely disconnected from the parable of the soils. Both of them have a very similar kind of end point. At the end of all things, at the end of the harvest, when the end of the age comes and the reapers, the angels are sent, what they're gathering up are fruitful Christians. Right? In the parable, he sends out it's funny, I love my dispensational brothers and sisters, but in this parable, like, the rapture is the rapture of the unbelievers, right? The angels go out and reap the unbelievers first. The weeds are bundled up and thrown into the fire, and then the fruitful wheat is gathered into the barns. There is this delineation between the fruitless weeds and the fruitful wheat, or the grain that has borne fruit. That is part of what the outward elements of this parable are. So we should talk about that more, of what is this trying to get at in terms of not just the difference between weeds and wheat and how that maps up to those who are in Christ versus those who are not in Christ, but also, like, what is this telling us about the end of the age, eschatology? All of that's baked in here, and we haven't even scratched the surface of that yet.
Yeah, we just can't even on this episode. Probably, you're right. We're going to have to go to 2. So that, I guess, it's like a teaser for the next one. I'm totally with you. It's interesting. I've been thinking about that question a lot. And I do like what you're saying. At the end here, it's almost as if Christ is saying, at the time of harvest, things become more plain, more evident. In the beginning, the shoots are going to look really, really similar. And you're going to go in and you're going to think you're guessing properly or using your best judgment, and you're going to get it wrong. In the end, when he sends out those who are harvesting, I like in this passage here in the explanation, as you read it to us starting in verse 36, how there's this comparison of heat and light. And so there is the heat and light of the fiery furnace, into which, as you said, all of those who are the children of the enemy will be gathered up and burned. And then there's that contrast with, in verse 43, then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. So there is like a reward that comes from the bearing of the fruit, and that made evident by a different type of heat and light. So I do struggle with this question because it's easy to answer in some ways. If we're defining the weeds in part, or the tares in part, as false professors, typically, let's say false professors of a nefarious kind, then it seems pretty plain that that the enemy has implanted certain people to stir up trouble with the intention to stir up trouble. That is in fact their jam. Or they know that even if they're putting on airs, that they are in fact play acting, that the hypocrisy is purposeful, and that it is part of like the missional effort that they're doing to disrupt what God is doing in the world. So I might think of somebody like when we're looking in Exodus, and we find that at least to some degree, all of Pharaoh's magicians can replicate everything that Moses is doing. Moses is doing that by the power of God, but the magicians are so good in whatever means they're using, but they know, I presume they know, they're not using Yahweh. They're not drawing their power or their influence from Yahweh.
Right.
But it's so convincing to the people that Pharaoh's is like, yeah, obviously I've seen that before because we just did that here. Come back with your next trick. Until God flexes his mighty muscles in a really profound way, which cannot be replicated. And at some point, there's a harvest that happens there. There's a separation between the two. Those who are truly professing the power that comes from God, the one true God, and those that are just replicating the cheap copy, the one that's just pure trickery and smoke and mirrors. So that's an easy category. I'm with you. And I'm not saying that this is an invitation to bring the kind of judgment here that we've just spoken against. I'm not condoning this. What I do find interesting, though, is if the enemy is crafty, is it possible that there are always going to be forms of terror in the world that do feel that they have very strong conviction and belief about biblical things? Maybe there's strong hobby horses, or there are misguided directions here that pull us apart, that become distractions, or maybe it's just even attitudes, things that can be divisive, disruptive, derogatory, that again pull us away from making the plain things the main things and the main things the plain things, which in some ways draws us back to like the whole purpose of you and I talking every week, which is we want to get back to what the scripture teaches. We want to follow our Lord Jesus Christ very, very closely. We want to cling to the hem of his robe as we walk through life so that we do not fall to those kind of false convictions. So I'm not, please hear me, loved ones, I'm not trying to call into question your faith, as Tony just said. I am saying that this is kind of scary. Just like we talked about, there are elements of the parables of the soil that were equally scary. And so it's just in some ways to say, we got to keep our heads on a theological swivel. We got to be about the Lord's business, and we got to be about understanding through prayer and study and communion with him what it is that he wants to teach us in the purest way, knowing that the church itself and the world, of course, is never going to be entirely pure. At the same time, it is our responsibility to, as you already said, test for ourselves, to understand what is that true gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, because some tares are going to be maybe easy to identify and without, throwing too much shade, or I was going to say spilling the tea. I don't think that works here, but I'm not young anymore, so I'm fine to use. Or put on blast. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses. Like it's easier there to be like, This is wrong. It is a false profession. But we've just got to be careful, even in our own hobby horses, to not deviate into ground, I think, that doesn't preclude us from being children of the light and children of the kingdom, but can still be disruptive or, just distracting. But either way, I think what's scary to me about this is exactly what you said, Tony, is could it be that there are people that are very sincere about the Christian faith, but are sincerely wrong?
Yeah.
And what does that mean for God's elected purpose? What does that mean for our understanding of how to interact in our churches and in the world? Does that make sense?
It does. And I'm not sure whether you were trying to set up what might be the first genuine Reformed Brotherhood cliffhanger, but you did, because we're on minute 54 of a 60-minute podcast. And there's no way we're going to get into that and not go for another 60 minutes. So Jesse, I'm glad that we are taking our time. I know that sometimes it's easy when you put out a schedule or you put out a sort of projected content calendar to feel like you have to stick to it. But I want to give these parables the time they deserve and the effort and the study and the discussion that they deserve. And I think the questions you're posing here at the end of this episode are really, really important. And they are questions that this parable forces us to ask, right? It's not as though we're just using this as a launching pad. If the workers can't tell the difference between the seed and the weeds and the wheat, it's reasonable to think that the weeds themselves may not be able to tell the difference, right? The sons of the evil one are probably not in this parable, are probably not the people like in the back, like doing fake devil horns.
Right.
Like there's probably more going on that we need to unpack, and we'll do that next week.
Yeah, I love it. So we've got some good stuff coming then, because we've got to, this is like, do you ever, remember when you were in, doing your undergraduate or postgraduate work, you'd get like a topic or an assignment or a paper and you'd be super stoked about it. And you start reaching it, be like, okay, researching it. And you'd be like, all right, I've got some good topics here. And then you get into it, you're like, oh, but I'm going to have to talk about this. And like before I could talk, I'm going to have to
Yeah.
explain this. Sometimes when we get into these, as you and I've been talking, that's what it feels like. We're like, we can wrap this up. And not
Right.
because we're like trying to put it into like these really fine, bite-sized, little sound bite, discrete chunks. But I did think, yeah, we should be able to do this. And then the more you and I talked, the more I was thinking, wow,
Yeah.
there is so much for us here. Like it's just opening up into these grand vistas, and we've got to stop and do a 360 view. We got to like take out the phone. We can't just snap a couple stills. We got to take a video and do that whole panoramic thing on the iPhone. And it takes time. You got to go gently with the phone. You do too fast, just like a blur, or you end up with like the same person on both sides. It's going to be weird. So next episode, we're definitely going to have to hit this stuff. We already talked about the enemy Satan, but here's what we're going to have to get into. The harvest, we got some final judgment action. The reapers, we got angels executing God's justice. And then there's the barn, which is probably the consummated kingdom and new creation. So
yeah,
there is so much left. But because we've only scratched the surface, Tony, if people have their own thoughts on this, and they might be thinking, I only wish I could tell Tony and Jesse my perspective on this. There's got to be a way. Have we made a way? Is that even possible?
I feel like there's a way. I can just, so if you go to t.me/Reformed Brotherhood, I'm guessing if you've made it this far into the episode, you're still listening. You're probably already in the Telegram chat. But if you're that random person who listens to the ends of podcasts, even though it's just announcements, if you want to come have that conversation, we would love to have you. Telegram is just a chat service. It's a pretty straightforward text messaging app with some extra features. We have a corner of the internet that we've carved out that for the most part is kind and friendly. People are genuine, and because we fill sort of a little niche and we all are sort of weirdos in the same way, it's pretty easy to spot when like a bot comes in there, and we get those out of there pretty quick. But we care about each other, and we pray for each other, and we talk through theology, and we share funny videos of us tasting new foods that are gross and weird. So come check us out, t.me/Reformed Brotherhood. If you don't have Telegram, that will guide you to how to install it on whatever device you'd like. And it pretty much every device that you can get apps on, you can get Telegram on. If you do have Telegram, it'll jump you right into the channel, and you can look around before you join, and then you can join, and we would love to have you. And as long as you're going to be contributing to the friendly part of the internet that we're trying to build, then you'll fit right in.
And there's been so much great conversation. Maybe what we should do is I'm just going to drop into part of the Telegram chat and call out somebody. So that way, that we're always in the mix ourselves, but that it's just fun to see. These are brothers and sisters, men and women from all over the globe. I mean, we can say that confidently because we know people often disclose where they're listening to us, but I'm just going to call out Brother Wesley, who has dropped in this week and has had spurred some great conversation. And he did it in a particular way because not only can you type your messages, and it's the world in the land of text messages. Who doesn't love that? But in Telegram, you can also leave a voice message. So you can actually have your own voice in the Telegram chat for people to listen to and then to respond. And like, for instance, Tony and I are recording right now, and somehow I can see that Tony's typing in the Telegram. That's how good it is, loved ones. We're not even done yet talking. Tony's already in the Telegram. So go to t.me/Reformed Brotherhood. Over to you, Tony.
You're too fast. I had to throw a little GIF up there. Nobody's going to know what it's about until they listen to it. And
it's great. I love it.
So yeah, please join us. We usually have a bunch of other announcements, but we'll skip that for now. We're really excited about this series that we're on. I mentioned it before, like there's something so great about just getting together with someone you care about and just talking about the Bible. And that's really what this podcast is about. Jesse and I have these kinds of conversations when we're in the same place, whether we're at the beach or we're together at Christmas time or chatting on our own private Telegram chats or phone calls or whatever. And these are just conversations that are great to have. And it's always good to sit and chat about the Bible. So please do pick up a decent commentary. Please read ahead. We're going to be still in the parable of the tares next week, for sure next week, and maybe even the week after that. Who knows? Only the Lord knows. Jesse, and until we get there, I could see you're jumping in.
No, I was just, okay. Can I give, we didn't talk about this, but can I give like a peremptory, survey thing?
Yeah, do it.
you just remind me of something. If you made it this far, congratulations. You're of the elect. No, I'm just kidding. So you reminded me that we are together at certain times of the year. One of those times is coming up. We're coming up to like celebrating in that new year, that really the 10th anniversary, which is so incredible and hard to believe. I was thinking about that today. It feels like maybe max 5 years, but somehow
know.
a decade has gone by and we just won't stop talking. So because you and I are going to be together at the end of the year, we're recording this, we're sitting in October right now. I want to give everybody some time to think about this. We always talk about when we're together doing something special, something different. And so let's throw it out to the listeners and we'll maybe keep this in front of you. What would that be? So like, I'm going to throw all of our family, our combined family under the bus, Tony, and just volunteer them if there's enough strong interest from the listening loved ones. So what would you like to hear /see? That could be, we could do some tastings. We've talked about that, whether it's like Necco wafers, other kinds of candy, kimchi, we got all kinds of stuff there in the mix. Maybe you would like to hear from our resident pastor, who is my father, Tony's father-in-law, the venerable Reverend Dr. Kevin Schwam, or my mother, or maybe you would like to hear, we've floated this before, but that's that elusive, the Reformed Brotherhood Wives Tell All episode, where we're not even on that episode.
It's true.
And they just talk, assuming we can convince our wives to do that. But
Yeah.
I bet we could if there was interest. So here's your chance to jump in a Telegram chat and just let us know, and we'll keep bringing it up. What did I miss, Tony? What would be other things that we've said over the years that would be different and fun that we could really only do or do really well when we're actually sitting in the same place?
I don't know. You kind of put me on the spot. I don't know. I'll think about it a little bit. You know, the only member of our family, and this isn't even really true, but the only member of our family who has not made an actual appearance on the podcast is your wife.
Yeah, I mean, aside from
one time I text messaged her and told her to walk in the room and yell Yahtzee and walk out of the room, and she did it. And that's the only appearance of the elusive Jesse's wife on the podcast.
Yeah, that's true. But our wives have never really done a podcast together, right?
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, I mean, well, if she's never been on, that's true. And to some degree, your children haven't really been on, but like they've been present and they've been on the camera a couple of times because they're adorable.
That's true. Yeah. Sometimes Augie makes a little bit of noise. He's on.
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, he's chatty. He could
is.
just carry a whole lot. I mean, the listener doesn't know that you and your wife actually recorded, like it's secretive. But there was like what was it called?
He likes to do podcasts now. He says, let's record a podcast. And I go, all right, let's open the podcast. He goes, hi, everybody. This is the Augie Show. And then he's like, let's talk about how I fell down at the library today. And yeah. He's good. He's natural.
I'm not gonna lie to you guys. It was better than 75% of the podcasts that I listened to. Like I'm talking both production and content. And the kid was definitely natural. What impressed me, Tony, and I know we're well over time, but now we're really advertising for other podcasts that'll be in the network, like the Augie Show. It's fantastic. And had me on the edge of my seat because I was like, what did happen at the library? It's interview style, which was delightful. But when you said, what do you want the people, your wife, who was doing the first episode with him, it's wild we can talk like this, of the Augie Show, said, like, what do you want the people to know? It's just in the background going, podcast.
Yeah.
I didn't even know he knew that word, but like the enunciation of that particular word was like so good and strong. I was like, you are your father's son.
Yeah. Well, it's because we'll wrap this up. I promise as soon as I say this, I'll say the thing and we'll end the show. Because this is like a sub affirmation. It'll have to be a formal affirmation at some point. The listener knows that for a while I was recording outside. Now it's like 58 degrees, like 55 degrees by the time I'd be recording. So my mother-in-law has been gracious enough to let me use a spare room at her house. So every Saturday night I have to tell her, yeah, I have to go. I'm not going to be here for bedtime. And he always goes, well, where are you going? I say, well, I have to go record a podcast with Uncle Jesse. So now he started saying, like, I want to record a podcast with Uncle Jesse. And I'm like, Uncle Jesse wants to record a podcast with you, kids. So it's going to happen. It's going to happen.
I love it. So everybody be thinking of what kind of fun things we can do together. What you like to hear, honestly. You've heard a lot of us, and maybe there's something in particular, but it's always fun when we can actually be together. And we're going to have all this family together. And so if you want a little bit more insight, or you're just tired of hearing Tony and I talk, that's okay. We got some other people that you might be interested in hearing. It's a pretty strong network. All right. That's enough from both of us. We hope that you will come back next week because there's so much more to say, as there has been for the past decade. But until that time arrives, Or if the Lord comes before then, let's honor everyone.
Love that brotherhood.
What if I